Hi and welcome. I hope this is recording fine. My name is Tom Bennett. I am currently the Department for Education's Behaviour Advisor or Behaviour Czar, and it is my pleasure to give you a short run through as to some of the things that I think will be most useful to you when it comes to starting in schools, starting with classes, and getting the behaviour right from the start. It's something which can be done very well, it's something that can be done very badly. Everyone can get better at it, and it gets better for most people if you try, but it's really important you try to do the right things. There's lots of mistakes we can make, so I'll try to help you avoid some of those just now. Okay. So the first thing I want to say to you is this, is that good behaviour is more than just sitting still and shutting up. I mean, it's not sitting still and shutting up. I mean, it is also that. I want children to be able to be quiet when they need to be quiet. I want them to be able to listen and think and reflect and really think deeply about what somebody else is saying or doing. But I also want them to be able to speak in a polite, civil, and productive and structured manner. So really, for me, good behaviour is compliance, and I think compliance is a good thing. But I also think that it's also more than compliance. Okay, and the reason why I mention that is because sometimes people get a little bit caught up thinking, oh, I don't mind if the class is noisy as long as they're learning. I assure you, if the class is noisy and busy and frantic, they're probably not learning as much as they should be. If what you need is for them to listen to you and to listen to instructions and listen to new content and material. So that's one of the first things we have to get out of the way, particularly when you're new, is that it's really, really important to teach children a variety of good behavioural habits. They need to be able to know when to be quiet and when to speak. And those are two different behaviour modes. And that's what good behaviour means to me. So for example, I would say that there is what we might call negative good behaviour, which is when people are not misbehaving, negative good behaviour, they're not misbehaving. We might call that compliance. And I don't think compliance is a bad thing. I think that it's a reasonable expectation that children should learn to follow reasonable instructions the first time you ask them. Okay? But also there's a bit more than that, what I call positive good behaviour, which is good habits of behaviour, what you actually want them to do, not just what you don't want them to do, but what you want them to do. So it's not just about avoiding bad behaviour, it's also about encouraging good behaviour. And I think that understanding is absolutely essential to having good behaviour management. That one of the things that really transformed things for me, and I was a teacher for 13 years before I went to the dark side, is that I spent all my time just clamping down on misbehaviour, which is good, and you must, if kids misbehave and muck about, then you have to do something. But what I didn't realise was I should be really focusing, as well as that, but I should be really focusing on teaching the behaviour that I want them to do. Teaching good behaviour, in other words. Because a lot of the things we ask children to do at school are deeply unnatural to them. And some children are really lucky they've come from homes or prior educational phases where they've learnt patience and sharing and good habits and so on. But also there's lots of children who come from homes where they haven't been taught these things, but it's not normal to behave like that. And they don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just how they behave. So one of the things we have to do and acknowledge is that as educators, we have to teach them the behaviour that they'll need in order to flourish as human beings, but also as learners in a classroom community, okay? So teach good behaviour, don't just respond to bad behaviour. But, important caveat, you must respond to bad behaviour, okay? I'll come back to that in a second. Why is behaviour so important? I mean, this might sound a slightly obvious thing to try to sell to you, but one of the things I'll say is that a lot of people think that behaviour isn't that important, that behaviour is of secondary importance when it comes to, the quality of the content that you teach them, or the curriculum, or your pedagogy, or building up a relationship with children, and so on. And these things are all important. But whatever you want to achieve from education, good behaviour improves every single one of those outcomes. If you want children to be academic, and I hope you do, right? I hope you want them to learn stuff, then they've got to behave. If you want them to accrue social benefits, social mobility, well-being, mental health, creativity, social mobility, vocational opportunity, millions of other things, whatever you think education is for, better behaviour facilitates all of it. So please don't think for a second that by teaching children to behave, you're somehow crushing their creative souls, crushing their spirits. Not at all. If you want to get good at anything, you've got to try and work hard and do your best, and you've got to develop quite effective habits and skills to help you do that. So one of the problems, I think, in education is that behaviour management has kind of fallen out of fashion slightly. There's lots of kind of weird myths about behaviour management, and like things like if your lesson's well planned, they'll behave. I want to be clear here. a well-planned lesson will help your behaviour, and a badly planned lesson will make behaviour worse. But it's not the sole factor that really determines how they behave. There's lots of other things going on in people's behaviour rather than just, you know, the quality of the lesson content. If a child isn't ready to learn, then it doesn't matter how well planned your lesson is. And I think the behaviour management has fallen out of fashion. It's seen as being kind of, you know, cruel or something, which I just think is so strange. When it's one of the best things you can do for children, if you really care about them, and you care about their emotional well-being, their academic well-being, and their physical well-being. One of the key priorities for any teacher is to create a calm and safe and dignified learning environment. You know, where kids are as unstressed as possible, where it's safe and where they're treated with dignity. So those three things are absolutely key. So I think behaviour management should be back in fashion, and fortunately it kind of is. I think sometimes we're trying to teach behaviour management indirectly by, you know, whizzy lessons. Sometimes it's taught as an afterthought, like you might get a 45-minute behaviour lecture, as I did when I was a trainee teacher. And that was all. Sometimes it's taught badly, sometimes it's taught very badly. I remember one keen mentor at the beginning of my career suggested that the key to making my students behave was to get them laughing. You know, I just remember the weeks of pain that followed this really terrible advice. I mean, laughter is a wonderful medicine, but it's not exactly what you might want to use with a challenging class if you really hate your subject, and by virtue of that, you. Here's a little health warning: be incredibly wary of taking behaviour lessons from somebody who couldn't run your class. You know, and we see this in the media and we see it in schools. So make sure that whatever you do, you don't do that. Oh, hang on. Really? You really? 1 second. Apologies, I had a small boy walk into that room there. I don't know how much of that you got. I hope not too much. Anyway, see, behaviour management is a thing at home as well. Welcome to the age of COVID. So be really, really wary of listening to people who give you behaviour advice who couldn't, you know, run your classes yourself. This comes to what I call creating a culture, which is that one of the interesting things about classrooms is that they're a small community, and they've got norms and they've got views and they've got beliefs. And culture is really important. But what I mean by culture is the beliefs and values of a community. And your children have lots of different beliefs and values about education, learning, you, behaving, your subjects, and so on. And one of the things I think is terribly important is that we try to create the culture of the classroom, which is to say, we try to encourage children to understand the correct beliefs and values about how we flourish in a classroom. So some kids will come from homes, for example, where education isn't seen as important, or your subject isn't important, you know, or working hard, or doing their best, or sharing, or being patient, or even not shouting out. All these things are seen as being normal or abnormal, depending on the homes that they've come from. And one of your jobs is to say, okay, fine, we've all got different beliefs and attitudes and values, but we need to share a basic set of attitudes and values for this classroom to flourish. So in this classroom, you know, we value working hard, we value being kind, we value being on time, we value doing our best, we appreciate mistakes when they lead to greater learning, and so on. You know, hopefully relatively uncontroversial beliefs and values. And you teach the children that these values are important, and you mention them and you talk about them a lot. And you let children know that these things are important, because this might be the first time they've heard these things. And some of the kids in your class may already have these values and beliefs, and they might think, yeah, this is obvious. Of course, learning matters. Of course, we should be kind to each other, and so on. But it might not be. It also might be the first time they've heard these things. So it's up to you to do so. Okay. So how you create a culture? Well, you know, there's lots of ways of doing this. One of the ways, there's two main ways. One is what I call the proactive method, which is when you create norms and routines. And the second thing is when you have responses, which is to say you respond, you have consequences for children's behaviour. So one side of this equation, or this circle, is before they've behaved or misbehaved, and the other side is afterwards. And I'll talk about both of them just now. Okay. Oh, incidentally, both of these things lead to the kind of Shangri-La of relationships. You'll often hear people say, oh, behaviour management's all about relationships. And then they'll kind of leave it there, as if they've told you something useful. Behaviour management kind of is about relationships, but it kind of isn't. You know, it is in the sense that you want children to learn how to respond to you and learn how to behave with you and learn to trust you and learn to know that you want the best for them and learn to know that you value them and so on. And these are all great relational things. But at the same time, relationships are built on trust, and trust is built on structure and predictability and reliability. Basically consistency. So you've got to be the same person every day for these kids. You got to mean what you say and say what you mean. You've got to have a set of routines and norms and rules that you live by and expect them to live by and everyone to live by in order for that relationship to flourish. You know, if you just make things up as you go along, if you sometimes let misbehavior slide one day but not another for no real reason, or if you let somebody off with something but not another person, if you're inconsistent, the relationship you build up with children is one of chaos. And they'll respond to that chaos by making up their own rules and routines and norms and so on. So it's super important that you are the adult in the room, and you either feel confidently about that, or you pretend to feel confidently about that. But the kids need that. They need an adult in the room. So never for 1 second think, oh my goodness, I should be negotiating my rules with these children. No, what a pointless abdication of responsibility on your part. You need to step up to the role and know that these children need you to run the room. They need you to be a grown-up. And they need a teacher. They don't need a tall chum. You know, they don't need a big. They've got pals. All right. They need an adult. They need a teacher, and that's a really important. That's a really important responsibility. It's a privilege to occupy that role. The routines. Basically, a routine is a set sequence of behaviour, and most of the behaviour you want in the classroom is going to be uncontroversial. You know, conventional, repetitive, even. You know, how they enter the room, how they leave the room, how they transition between activities, how they respond to questions, how they go for a break. How they tell you that they're stuck, how they ask a question, how they answer a question. There's lots of little behaviours you want, which honestly aren't controversial and shouldn't be complicated, but some children really struggle with because they're not used to it. So one of the key things you need to do as a teacher is to think, what behaviour do I want them to exhibit? And consciously teach it to them. And I mean teach them, don't just tell them once, teach them. How do you teach? Well, you introduce new material to somebody. You know, this is how I want you to enter the classroom. Here's a picture on the board. I'm going to demonstrate it to you now. And you then get them to do something which demonstrates their learning. So, for example, you might want to, get them to do it. So, if you want them to practice the routine of entering the classroom, get them to do it. And then what else do you do when you teach? Well, you correct common misconceptions. You know, that's not quite right. Jasmine, tell Ryan what we should be doing. Good, well done. You reteach the parts they didn't get. And then you get them to do it all over again. And, you know, that's a really, really simple kind of coaching model of pedagogy, but I think it's a pretty strong one. And it's how we teach behaviour, because behaviour is a curriculum and we need to teach behaviour, which means we teach routines. Don't just expect children to get it first time. Don't expect them to know how to behave. Don't think for 1 second that every child deep down knows how you want them to behave, and they either just choose not to do it or choose to do it. Some children don't have the habits yet. Some children don't understand what you mean. Some children don't agree with the types of behaviours and your values. So you've got to teach it. So teach behaviour like a curriculum, like anything else, and teach the routines you want to see. And what routines do you need? Well, it depends on what you think the class isn't very good at yet. So if they're not good at coming into the lesson, teach them how to begin the lesson. I mean, physically get them to practice that and teach them and reteach and correct them and see it as a learning activity, and so on. And if you're meeting a class for the first time, I suggest you preempt all of this by front-loading all of your behaviour expectations and all your routines right at the start of your relationship and say, good morning, my name is Mr. Bennett, fill in the blank. I really look forward to teaching you. I look forward to teaching my subject. I love my subject. And I know that you can all do really well. I'll do my best to make sure you do really well, but you're going to have to try your hardest as well. And I want you to be able to be safe in this classroom. And I know that you can be safe here because what you do matters to me. And I want you to be calm. And I want you to work hard. And I want you all to be treated with manners and dignity. Right? And that includes me. And here's how we're going to achieve that. Now that's my little stump speech, my little script for how I used to speak to all my new classes. And basically what it indicates is this. Here are the beats that I spit. You matter. I matter. The subject matters. I want you to do well. I know you can do well. I'll help you do well. You've got to try with me. Here's how we're going to achieve all these wonderful things. Does that make sense? So you're making sure that everyone feels like they're a member of the community. And that's how you frame it. That's how you sell your routines and behaviour. You don't just walk into a class and try to teach and then react when somebody misbehaves. That's a really good way of the children learning that the only time they'll hear about behaviour is when they get it wrong, which isn't a great way to teach anybody anything. You still must respond to misbehaviour, don't get me wrong. I still believe in sanctions and reprimands and all the rest of it. But make sure that you really front load the expectations to give them a fighting chance. So identify the routines you want, communicate them in detail, i.e. teach them, and practice them until everyone falls asleep. I mean, seriously, practice, practice, practice. And if you think, oh no, I don't need to practice lining up, or I don't need to practice getting our books out, you do. You do. Particularly with the more challenging classes. Get them to do it once. If they don't do it right, get them to do it again. And congratulate them when they do. Okay? And constantly reinforce and patrol these routines as much as you can. So if you want to line up before a lesson so you can check your uniform, decide for yourself exactly how this looks. You know, do you want them to be quiet? Can they talk? Is it single file, two abreast, whatever? Decide. And then front load it by teaching them clearly. Get them to practice it and then remind them constantly, either verbally or through some kind of consequences. I think whenever you see somebody not meeting the standard that you've set previously, challenge that in some way. Respond to it. I'll talk about responses in just a second. But basically, you must have some kind of response to it. If you let it slide, it becomes normal not to do it. Okay. I would also encourage you to think about academic and social routines. So not just routines about how you interact with one another and how we walk along the corridor and how we, ask questions and so on, but also academic routines like how you lay out the page, how you structure an essay, how you want to show workings in mathematics or science or whatever. So make sure that they understand that there are routines both for how they interact and for how more pedagogically how they learn. And of course, both of these routines complement one another because you cannot entirely separate these routines. Routines are important because it saves you time. It reassures the class that there's consistency, justice, structure, and sense to the lesson. And don't underestimate how much children need to feel that. It preempts poor behaviour by getting ahead of it. It demonstrates that you actually have high expectations, which weirdly enough indicates that you care about them. Because if you think that they're capable of your high expectations, it means that you care about them. It teaches students good habits. And once it becomes a habit, it becomes part of them. So that's really important, useful. I don't know why I wrote saves time twice. Ironically, by writing saves time twice, I've wasted some time, so I'll skip on. And it frees up thinking space for better things. I don't want my kids thinking where their book goes, where their jotter goes. Jotter, how old do I sound? Exercise book. Or what they do when they're finished. A number of kids that you put their hand on and say, I'm finished. You should teach them what to do when they're finished. Whether it be checking the work or doing an extra piece of work or getting some extension work or whatever. I want them thinking about, music and poetry and art and magic and all the wonderful things that we teach them. And it reduces future misbehaviour because routines get in front of misbehaviour. Now, responses. Now, this is also really important. I think that front-loading the behaviour expectations is incredibly important, but just as important, although perhaps you should be doing it a wee bit less, is responding to misbehaviour, which is if you don't maintain your fence, there is no fence. If you don't have consequences to boundaries, there's no boundaries. And some children will be fine with not having boundaries. Some children will think, oh, I know I'm not supposed to do something. They'll sort of beg your pardon, they'll know that the boundaries are there. But some children need consequences for exceeding those boundaries. I mean, some kids are just, very conformist. Some kids want to please you, and some kids believe that what you've said to them is the right thing and all the rest of it. But some kids won't think that. Some kids will be impulsive or erratic or lazy or mean. Or they're forgotten, and you need some kind of consequences for people. So all students' behaviour should result in feedback behaviour from you to reinforce or deter that behaviour. Now this is where we get into what we might call a more behaviourist approach to behaviour management. And behaviourism is often derided as being insufficient as a way of managing people's behaviour. I would agree. I think that you cannot just punish and reward people into being good. You can't punish someone into being good, but you can't reward them into being good either. And you can't encourage everyone into being good. My point is, as a teacher, you need to use every strategy in your belt, every arrow in your quiver, every bat trick in your utility belt to get children behaving, because some things will work more with others, and some kids need to know that there are consequences for their actions. Some kids more than others, I might add. So you need to have consequences. You need to challenge when a norm or routine hasn't been followed. Otherwise, you're saying to them you can do anything. If the speed limit was 70 miles an hour, but nothing happened to people who exceeded it, very quickly people would realise that the speed limit is just a serving suggestion. So what kind of consequences? Well, I'm going to start with the ones that people use most of all, which is sanctions. And so I would suggest that sanctions are very important. I think they're an essential part of your repertoire. Because if you take away sanctions, then kids just think, oh, there's no consequences for my actions. And if you say, oh, I don't like sanctions, I'd rather just use pastoral chats and conversations, I assure you, if you keep a child for a 40-minute chat at the end of the day, they see that as a detention. You know, reprimands are sanctions, stern looks are sanctions, calling their parents are sanctions. So I think it's unrealistic to say, oh, I don't want to use sanctions. I don't want to use sanctions either. I hated using sanctions. I hated every single one of them. I think if you like using sanctions, you shouldn't be a teacher. But you use them not because you like them, you use them because they're necessary. And they're necessary quite frequently with some students. Now, you should do them as quickly as possible, as convenient as it is to you. So if you can do it at that break time, that lunchtime after school immediately, then that's probably the best thing to do. The longer it gets, the less connection there is between the behaviour and the consequence. But they should also be proportionate. You know, Bill Rogers, who's a great writer on behaviour, says that the certainty of a sanction is far more important than the severity. I couldn't agree more. You know, getting tough on sanctions doesn't make much of a difference. What we know about sanctions is that at best they deter misbehaviour. That's their effect. They deter future misbehaviour. They don't stop it. They deter. It's like a break rather than a wall, as it were. But then nothing is a wall. Nothing stops all misbehaviour. You want as many breaks as possible. And the deterrent effect of a sanction is magnified when it's highly predictable, which means consistent. So if kids know they're going to get a sanction, they'll be far more deterred by the thought about a sanction. So ironically, if you don't want to set sanctions very much, if you don't like them, then set sanctions very consistently. And don't let things slide and don't let kids off with stuff. Eventually, the children will learn that the sanction will follow the misbehaviour. And so, as I say, ironically, if you don't like sanctions, use sanction. How about that? So be as consistent as you possibly can. Now, we know that there's some children that sanctions don't have much of an impact on, but we also know that there's some children that sanctions have a much bigger impact on. And we know that most children are kind of affected by sanctions to some extent. So don't let a kid off with a sanction because you think, oh no, they got a sanction yesterday. It's not working. It might not be working yet. The kid might just need to see that you are serious about your boundaries. You know, sometimes some children need several sanctions. But B, everyone else is watching that kid getting or not getting a sanction. And if they see that kid not getting a sanction where previously they did, the rest of the class thinks, oh, I can do it too. And you've normalized the misbehavior. So remember that we're dealing with communities and social groups, and one child's behavior affects every other child's behavior. Okay. So as much as you possibly can, particularly as a newer teacher, use the school policy. This enables you to borrow authority. Don't go off-piste. You know, use the school behaviour policy, and then the kids will know that you're part of the school. Okay. And also, don't just let kids off because you feel it being nice. Children will play you for this. And I know it sounds a dreadful thing to say, but it's absolutely true. You know, some kids will be forever grateful to you for letting them off, but other kids will just think, haha, I can do this again. And worse still, other children will see you doing that and think, oh, you only set sanctions for the kids you don't like. And you just, that's toxic for the relationship, okay? So if you do have an exception, and you can have lots of exceptions, particularly for special educational needs and so on, but your exceptions must be exceptional, and always follow up with your sanctions. Rewards are similar, actually. They also should be sincere, proportionate. Sorry, that should say targeted. But the best reward is a sincere congratulations or praise. You know, letter home, a kind word in their plan, or some kind of verbal encouragement, put their work on the wall or whatever. Because what children really want is to be noticed. They want to be valued and they want to matter. And if you can target your rewards to children in that way using praise, first of all, it's free, but best of all, it's really effective. Again, it doesn't make people good. It's just a mild behavioral nudge. It's a short-term behavior modifier, but it ain't nothing. And it's incredibly powerful. And, you know, some children remember a piece of praise they get the rest of their lives, which will encourage them to reach for that behavior again and again and again. You know, if you get a kid who comes into school every day with a dirty collar and no pens, then one day they come in properly dressed, for who knows why. You say to that kid, your uniform looks great today, thank you, you look great. And then you walk away, so that nobody else can hear. And that kid might just feel 3 inches taller. Or they might not, but they might. That's the point. And for the child that always comes in with a, you know, a clean uniform and lots of equipment, you don't say that to them every day. You target the praise proportionately, and you say to that kid every 6 months, you know, your uniform's always fantastic. You work really hard. You're always on time. I'm sending a postcard home to your parents just to say thank you. You know, things like that really matter. Okay, don't kill children with kindness. I mean, don't kill them in general, but don't kill them with kindness. Don't start a trade war of rewards like bitcoins. You know, like giving out merits all the time. Merits are very useful, but be quite, I wouldn't say miserly about them, but don't be prodigious. Let kids know they've got to earn them. There's lots of other consequences you can use, incidentally. I only mentioned rewards and sanctions because they're the most commonly done thing, and also they're often done badly. You can have a chat with children, which, you know, often feels like a detention, but, you know, sometimes you need to get to the heart of what's going on with them. You need to investigate, particularly if the behaviour is repetitive. A parental meeting can sometimes be a very powerful intervention, not just as a scolding or as a sanction, but as a way of exploring ways forward and developing some kind of relationship with the parents. Having a department discussion with other people in your department, other people in your school who may have ideas and strategies. But as I said before, caveat emptor, make sure you speak to people that can manage behaviour or who are good with the pupils you're discussing. Parking children, you know, having children taken out your class, giving them a timeout, putting them somewhere else in the school, giving them some kind of extra class provision, which could be a nurture group. It could be, you know, if perhaps some of the problems stem from a literacy issue, then giving them some kind of literacy training and so on. And there's lots of other things you can do. Now, ultimately, this leads to better relationships. But I hope, as I've tried to make clear earlier on, relationships aren't something that you aim at directly. You know, don't try to make them like you by giving them lots of fun lessons and things they like to do all the time. A relationship occurs because they respect you as a teacher. And if you say to children in a school who are the best teachers, they never say, oh, you know, Mr. Bennett, because he always lets us do what we want. They don't respect that. They think you're Coco the friendly teacher. What you want to do is to be the other kind of teacher. Because when you say to children who are the best teachers, they always say the teacher with whom you really know where you stand, where the boundaries are, but who also, you know, that they care about them as a person and their education. It's weird, it's that combination of two things. It's the boundaries with the compassion. That's what really seems to put gas in the tank of a relationship. So routines and responses lead to good relationships. But also, yes, I mean, get to know your students' circumstances so you can talk to them appropriately. And be acutely aware of any feeder data about prior academic achievement, SEN, aptitude issues, problems, exceptionalities, and so on. I would suggest that you lean on scripts in public, that you pre-script your conversations with students, that you have set pieces of sentences ready to say to students before you need to say them, so that you're not flustered and thinking, oh, what should I say to these kids who are late? You should script in advance what you're going to say and what you're going to do when children muck about, so that you have a rough idea about what it is you're going to do, rather than deciding on the spot when you're feeling stressed. Because we know that when people are under stress, under pressure, that they tend to make much worse decisions, okay? So lots of errors. I want them to like me. If you teach well, they will like you. Don't aim for it directly. Oh no, my lessons aren't engaging enough. Try to make your lessons engaging, but not everything is going to be fascinating. You know, sometimes learning is hard work, and you want to teach them to persevere even when things aren't amazingly exciting, you know, even when there's not dancing bears and holograms and so on in party games. Don't aim for the relationship too directly. You know, please like me. I've mentioned this already. Don't give up. Persistence is your superpower. And if you say to yourself, I can't do this, I'm going to give up, then it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. You need to wear them down, and I promise you that they will give up before you do. Well, that's the hope anyway. Don't go alone. You're part of a school. You're part of a community, and remember, there are more students than there are teachers. You don't rule them by force of arm. You direct their behaviour. You manage them because you build up these routines, these expectations, and ultimately these relationships with the students. Don't expect the school to be perfect. Sometimes the school will let you down. I mean, sometimes you'll have fantastic mentors, line managers, and sometimes they'll forget stuff too. Always go back to the behaviour policy. And if a line manager lets you down, go back to them and say, look, I really need your help. I know you were busy yesterday. Can you help me today? Just keep putting pressure on people to help you, because sometimes they need it too. There's a few other things. Inconsistency will destroy your culture. Be as consistent as possible with everything that you do. These slides are available to you if you need them incidentally. Don't assume children know how to behave. Children often don't know how you want them to behave. And often the things we're asking them to do in schools are very, very complex. So teach them. Don't have no consequences. That's a great line. Don't have no consequences. Always have consequences. Always challenge misbehavior. And that then leads on to point number 10, which is always reinforce your behavior expectations. Talk about them constantly. Mention your norms, mention your rules, mention your routines, okay? Don't plead, don't be mean. And I'm going to skip over these ladders of consequence because I'm getting short of time here, but what I will say very briefly is this. Use the visible formal ladders of consequence in your school, C1, C2, C3, and use them well, but also use interpersonal skills to try to avoid always going to the detention, always going to the sanction. So for instance, if a child is misbehaving, maybe you want to just, if they're off-task behaviour, for example, you might want to redirect them onto the behaviour, you know, not by even saying it by name, just by saying everyone should be on question 3 by now, or something more subtle like, oh Ryan, what question are you on just now? Oh, that's great, try to get to question 7. You know, just nudging children back, tapping their desks if they start to chat, making eye contact, directing your voice, getting close to children if you want them to try to correct their behaviours. Obviously not quite so much in the days of COVID, but you get the drift. My point is there's lots of interpersonal things we can do to nudge children back onto the right behaviour without always having to go to C1, C2, C3, but do use consequence codes when you need to, okay? Always use, oh, by the way, TOEIC means things I wish I'd known. Sorry, TOEIC is things I wish I'd known. And the next TOEIC is specific, concrete, and sequential directions. Make sure that you're giving children really clear instructions about behaviour. Don't make them guess. Don't make them think to themselves, I wonder what he means. Always put yourself in their shoes. How would a 11-year-old listen to what I'm saying? How would they understand it? Check their understanding. Always assume someone doesn't get it. Be really specific about what you want to do. And be concrete. Give examples if you can. This is just good practice for how you want to explain anything, whether you're giving directions to, to the local supermarket, or how you want them to begin a lesson or end a lesson or transition within lessons. Okay. Rehearse your reactions as much as possible. Think about what you'll do before you need to do it. And good teacher training should provide you with these opportunities and have kind of, safe runs through your reactions, like one of these pilot programs. Okay, ask yourself, what will I do if behaviour X happens? Think about it. Talk to someone about it if you can, maybe another trainee or your mentor or someone, and then practice what it is. And I know it sounds awful, but you might even want to think about role playing it. And if you're really, really confident, you might want to film it. Okay, so that's come to the end of my short presentation about some of the big chunky things I think you should be doing when you first take over a lesson or a class. I think that advice is good for teachers throughout any stage of their career, but these are the things that I've seen happen in the most effective classrooms and schools. I've seen a lot of schools, I've seen a lot of classrooms, like MC Hammer. I've been around the world, forgive me, I just lost half the room with that. It's a very old pop star. And I've seen lots of schools and classes, and these are the things that people tend to do most to get good behaviour as quickly as possible. It's hard, but I'm not here to tell you that it's easy. I'm here to tell you that it's hard work, but it's valuable work. And if you want to get in touch with me, please feel free to drop me an email or get in touch with me on Twitter. I am occasionally on Twitter. But apart from that, I hope you have a very good day and good luck with the rest of what is one of the best careers in the world. And I hope you have a great year in life. Thank you.